In the world of American prisons, where walls are built to contain the most dangerous men alive, there was one inmate who terrified even the system designed to hold him. His name was Robert Charles Gleason, Jr., a convicted murderer already serving a life sentence. But for Gleason, life behind bars wasn't punishment. It was an opportunity. In 2007, he killed a man in Virginia. For most, that would be the crime that defined their fate. For Gleason, it was just the beginning. 2 years into his sentence, he strangled his 63-year-old cellmate with a length of electrical cord, coldly proving that even within maximum security, he could decide who lived and who died. Guards and inmates alike began to realize what Gleason himself declared openly: he would keep killing until the state executed him, and he meant it. In 2010, Gleason made good on his threat. From inside the recreation yard, separated only by a fence, he strangled another prisoner, a 26-year-old man, with homemade rope. It was brazen, chilling, and deliberate. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the courts to know that unless they sentenced him to death, more blood would be spilled. Unlike most death row inmates, Gleason didn't beg for mercy. He demanded execution. He waived appeals, rejected lawyers' pleas, and stared the judges in the eye, insisting that the electric chair was the only way to stop him. On January 16, 2013, strapped to Virginia's electric chair, Gleason got exactly what he wanted. His final words, a dark joke about the sponge that would carry the current into his body, and an Irish phrase that translated simply to "kiss my ass." Classification: murderer. Characteristics: killed 2 fellow inmates while serving a life sentence and vowed to keep on killing unless he was put to death. Number of victims: 3. Date of murder: 2000. Date of birth: April 10. Identity: victims profile: Michelle Kent, Jamerson, Harvey Watson Jr., Aaron Alexander Cooper. Method of murder: shooting. Strangulation location: Virginia, U.S. Status: sentenced to death on September 7. Executed by electrocution in Virginia on January 16, 2000. Gleason was serving life in prison for the 2007 fatal shooting of Michael Kent Jamerson in Amherst County. The murder was committed to cover up his involvement in a drug gang. In 2009, he became frustrated with prison officials because they refused to move out his new mentally disturbed cellmate. Gleason hog-tied, beat, and strangled 63-year-old Harvey Watson Jr., who was also serving time for murder. Gleason pled guilty. Both in court and in media interviews, Gleason vowed to continue killing if not given the death penalty, while awaiting sentencing at a highly secure prison for the state's most dangerous inmates. Gleason strangled 26-year-old Aaron Cooper through wire fencing that separated their individual cages in a recreation yard in 2010. Cooper was serving a 4-year sentence for robbery. Gleason again pled guilty, waived appeals, and got his wish after choosing the electric chair over lethal injection. The man who killed 2 inmates is executed. January 16, 2013. Jarhat. Robert Charles Gleason Jr., who strangled 2 fellow prison inmates, died in Virginia's electric chair Wednesday night, unapologetic to the end. Gleason, 42, was pronounced dead at 9:08 p.m. at the Greensville Correctional Center. Asked if he had a last statement, he said, among other things, "Put me on the highway going to Jackson and call my Irish buddies. God bless." He was sentenced to death for the brutal slayings of Harvey Gray Watson Jr., 64, 63, his cellmate at Wallens Ridge State Prison in 2009, and Aaron Alexander Cooper, 26, at Red Onion State Prison in 2010. Both men were strangled. Watson was tied up, taunted, beaten, and had a sock stuffed in his mouth. Cooper was repeatedly strangled and allowed to catch his breath before he finally died. Family members of at least one of the victims witnessed the execution from a private viewing area. Authorities keep the identities and number of such witnesses confidential. Of the 110 people executed in Virginia since executions resumed in 1982, he was just the second to die for killing an inmate. Gleason was serving life for a murder in Amherst County in 2007 when he killed Watson and Cooper. Gleason refused to appeal his death sentences and told lawyers not to oppose his execution. Gleason told the Associated Press that execution was the only way to stop him from killing. In a brief filed with the Virginia Supreme Court last year, the Virginia Attorney General's office wrote that Gleason was an unrepentant murderer, has no regard for human life, and will continue to kill. Killing to him is no different than going to the fridge to get a beer or tying a shoe, wrote officials, quoting Gleason himself. Gleason said authorities repeatedly made clear that he would continue to kill unless he received a death sentence. In affirming the death sentences, the Virginia Supreme Court noted that when Gleason pleaded guilty to Cooper's slaying, he claimed he deliberately targeted him as a favor to another inmate. To be released soon, and who would owe him a favor on the outside. Larry Traylor, spokesman for the Virginia Department of Corrections, said Gleason's only visitor Wednesday was his spiritual advisor. Death row inmates in Virginia have had the option to choose execution by lethal injection or the electric chair since 1995. Gleason was the 7th to opt for the chair, while 79 have died by injection. At 8:55 p.m., Gleason was led into the death chamber, surrounded by execution team members, who held his heavily tattooed arms. He was quickly strapped into the wooden electric chair at his chest, arms, and ankles. He smiled, winked, and nodded at times toward his spiritual advisor, sitting in the witness area. The advisor, Tim Bam Bam Spradling of the Richmond Outreach Center, said he believed Gleason was indicating all was well, and he was ready. After making his last statement, a wide leather strap that covered his eyes and mouth, but with a hole for his nose, was placed over his face and secured to the back of the chair. A brine-soaked sea sponge was attached to his right calf, and a metal cap holding another brine-soaked sponge was strapped to the top of his head. Power cables were then connected to the head and leg. A key on the wall was turned to activate the system, and an execution team member watching the chair from a one-way window pressed the execution button. The first cycle of electricity, approximately 1,800 volts at 7.5 amps, lasted 30 seconds, followed by 60 seconds at 250 volts at 1.5 amps. His body tensed, and his skin turned pink when the first cycle began. After a brief pause, a second 90-second cycle was conducted. After 5 minutes, a physician put a stethoscope to Gleason's chest just below a tattooed skull and failed to detect a heartbeat. A psychiatric evaluation of Gleason in 2010 found that he had a history of substance abuse, depression, and other problems, but concluded that he was not suicidal and was competent to stand trial. Gleason was a native of Lowell, Mass., not far from Boston, and was an accomplished tattoo artist in Colonial Heights. He wasn't a stone-cold killer with a dysfunctional personality to everyone. To Patrick Hoffman of Colonial Heights, Gleason was an extraordinary tattoo artist friend and something of a father figure. Hoffman said he had known Gleason since he was a teenager, had some tattoos from him, and worked in his second shop, Mom's Tattoo Parlor, from 2006 to 2007. "I knew him as Bobby. A lot of people called him Bobby," he said. "The Bobby Gleason I knew, he was a genuine, nice guy, all-around good person," Hoffman said. "He was never ever aggressive that I ever saw, and he was a great artist." He added, "I had heard in 2007 that he had gotten involved in a shooting. It was mind-blowing. No one could believe it." Former lawyers fought an 11th-hour effort to have Gleason re-evaluated for competency, but were given a final turndown by the U.S. Supreme Court Wednesday. Governor Bob McDonnell said last week that he would not intervene. VA executes convicted killer who sought death penalty. January 16, 2013, a convicted murderer who killed 2 fellow inmates while serving a life sentence and vowed to keep on killing unless he was put to death was executed Wednesday night in Virginia. Robert Gleason, Jr., 42, originally of Lowell, Mass., was pronounced dead at 9:08 p.m. at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarratt, the Associated Press reported. He was the first death row inmate since 2010 in Virginia to choose death by the electric chair instead of lethal injection. There were no complications. He also was the first inmate to be executed in more than a year. He had one visitor. Wednesday, a spiritual advisor. Earlier Wednesday, the Richmond-based U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit denied a request by Gleason's former attorneys to determine whether he was competent to waive his right to federal appeals. Governor Robert F. McDonnell R. announced last week that he would not intervene in the execution. Gleason's attorneys also appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which declined to block the execution. This is a bizarre case where the death penalty is actually the sole motivator for the killing, said John Sheldon, one of the attorneys. In court documents, the attorneys wrote, "There was significant evidence of mental illness in Gleason's history, including prolonged bouts of depression and multiple suicide attempts." Wise County prosecutors declined to comment on the case before the execution, but they wrote in court filings that the trial court had found that Gleason voluntarily and intelligently waived his appeals and had actively sought the death penalty. Gleason pleaded guilty to strangling his cellmate Harvey Watson with a bedsheet at the Wallens Ridge State Prison in 2009, saying under oath that he timed it to coincide with the anniversary of the killing for which he was sent to prison. In the first place, according to court documents, Gleason later told the court that he already had a few other inmates lined up just in case I didn't get the death penalty that I was going to take out. In 2010, he strangled another inmate through a wire fence in a recreation pen at the Red Onion State Prison, a supermax facility, according to court records. Prosecutors said he mocked the prison staff as they tried to revive Aaron Cooper. Gleason also pleaded guilty to that slaying and was sentenced to death in both killings. Gleason was given a life sentence for the slaying of Mike Jamerson in Virginia's Amherst County in 2007. Prosecutors said he carried out that killing to cover up his involvement in a drug gang. Virginia Department of Corrections officials said Wednesday that Gleason requested a final meal, but asked that officials not tell the media what it was. As of late afternoon, officials said he had received no visitors. Members of the victims' families attended the execution. Gleason was the 110th person put to death in Virginia since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, and the first since Jerry Jackson was executed in August 2011. Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty plan to hold a vigil outside the prison for Gleason and his victims. Gleason's case demonstrates the folly of capital punishment, said Stephen Northup, the executive director of the group. If we didn't have a death penalty, he wouldn't have killed these men. The inmate executed for killing 2 fellow prisoners, January 17, 2013, Jarratt. A man who strangled his prison cellmate and made good on a vow to continue killing if he wasn't executed, was put to death Wednesday in Virginia's electric chair. Robert Gleason, Jr., 42, was pronounced dead at 9:08 p.m. at Greensville Correctional Center. He became the first inmate executed in the United States this year, and the first to choose death by electrocution since 2010. In Virginia and 9 other states, death row inmates are allowed to choose between electrocution and lethal injection. Gleason was serving life in prison for the 2007 fatal shooting of a man, when he became frustrated with prison officials because they wouldn't move out his new mentally disturbed cellmate. Gleason hog-tied beat and strangled 63-year-old Harvey Watson Jr. in May 2009 and remained with the inmate's body for more than 15 hours before the crime was discovered. "Someone needs to stop it," he told the Associated Press after Watson's death. "The only way to stop me is put me on death row." While awaiting sentencing at a highly secure prison for the state's most dangerous inmates, Gleason strangled 26-year-old Aaron Cooper through wire fencing that separated their individual cages in a recreation yard in July 2010. As officers tried to resuscitate Cooper, video surveillance shows he had been choked on and off for nearly an hour. Gleason told them, "You're going to have to pump a lot harder than that." Gleason subsequently said in phone interviews that he deserved to die for what he did. "The death part don't bother me. This has been a long time coming," he said in one of the many interviews from death row. Gleason said he only requested death to keep a promise to a loved one that he wouldn't kill again. He said doing so would allow him to teach his children, including 2 young sons, what could happen if they followed in his footsteps. "I wasn't there as a father, and I'm hoping that I can do one last good thing," he said previously. Hopefully, this is a good thing. Gleason had fought last-minute attempts by attorneys to block the scheduled execution. The lawyers had argued that he was not competent to waive his appeals, and that more than a year spent in solitary confinement on death row had exacerbated his condition. 2 mental health evaluations done before Gleason was sentenced in 2011 said he was depressed and impulsive, but competent to make decisions in his case. Late Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a request for a stay. Use of the electric chair remains rare in Virginia. Since inmates were given the option in 1995, only 6 of the 80 inmates executed have chosen electrocution over lethal injection. Cooper's mother, Kim Strickland, had made plans to witness the execution. She has sued the prison system over her son's death and said she hopes Gleason's family can have closure. "May God have mercy on his soul," Strickland said before the execution. "I've been praying and will continue to pray that his family can heal from this ordeal." Watson's sister, Barbara McLeod, said she had mixed feelings about the execution, but didn't want him to be able to kill more people. She nor anyone else from Watson's family witnessed the execution. Gleason did not visit with family before his execution. Inmates' families are not allowed to witness executions in Virginia. Some protested outside the prison on Wednesday, saying Gleason's threats to continue killing should not be a reason to justify execution. Despite Gleason's crimes and his insistence on being executed, the state should not kill its own citizens under any circumstances, said Stephen Northup Virginians, for Alternatives, just to the death penalty's executive director. Monday, August 16, 2010, Robert Gleason Jr. loathed his new cellmate, Harvey Gray Watson Jr. He told officials at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Virginia as much. Gleason also told counselors and correctional officers that if they didn't move, Watson, bad shit was going to go down. They didn't listen. For a solid week in the early days of May 2009, the 63-year-old Watson, serving a 100-year sentence for killing a man and wounding 2 others with a 10-gauge shotgun in 1983, became an obnoxious fuck to Gleason's uneventful incarcerated existence. Watson, who suffered from mild mental impairment, spent almost every minute of every day with Gleason, locked up in an 8-by-10-foot cell, singing verses from the song Dixie at all hours, hollering expletives and jerking off. During eating hours and rec time, other inmates would egg Watson on to drink his own urine and spoiled milk in exchange for cigarettes. Gleason couldn't take it. Despite his pleas to have Watson shipped off to another cell prison, officials scoffed. Going on to the 8th day of their shared existence, Gleason knew the time had come. That day I knew I was going to kill him. Wallen's Ridge forced my hand. The witching hour came when bed checks were over and lights were out at the facility. It was sometime past midnight. Gleason tied Watson's hands and arms to his torso using fragments of bed sheets. He also fashioned a gag using a pair of socks. Gleason soon removed the gag and lit a cigarette for Watson. He told him to enjoy it, as it would be his last. Watson spit on Gleason's face when the smoke was removed. Gleason responded by hopping on Watson's back, beating him, and ultimately strangling him to death. Gleason covered the corpse with a bedsheet to make it look like Watson was sleeping. Officials wouldn't discover the murdered man's body until almost dinner time the following day. In the aftermath of Watson's strangulation death, Gleason, already serving a life term for killing another man, told the Associated Press, "I murdered that man, Watson, cold-bloodedly. I planned it, and I'm gonna do it again. Someone needs to stop it. The only way to stop me is to put me on death row." Now, a year and change later, Gleason is still not getting his wish of being introduced to capital punishment granted. So he decided to sending prison officials another reminder, late last month at the maximum security. Red Onion State Prison, Gleason's new home, in southwestern Virginia. Old inmate Aaron Alexander Cooper was found strangled to death in the recreation yard. According to Wise County Commonwealth's attorney Ron Elkins, Gleason was at the very least involved in the murder. It is more likely, though, the facts will bear out that Cooper died at the hands of Gleason. Authorities believe Cooper was strangled with a towel, piece of clothing, or bedsheet that was somehow put through the chain-link fence separating each inmate. In 2 weeks, Gleason is scheduled to be sentenced for murdering Watson last year. Attorney Elkins has said he will wait until that sentencing before he decides what course to take regarding Gleason's involvement in his latest killing. June 13, 2010. For 7 days, Robert Gleason Jr. begged correctional officers and counselors at Wallen's Ridge State Prison to move his new cellmate. The constant singing, screaming, and obnoxious behavior were too much, and Gleason knew he was ready to snap. On the 8th day, May 8, 2009, correctional officers found 63-year-old Harvey Gray Watson Jr. bound, gagged, beaten, and strangled. His death went unnoticed for 15 hours because correctional officers had not followed proper procedure for inmate head counts at the high-security prison in southwestern Virginia. Now Gleason says he'll kill again if he isn't put to death for killing Watson, who had a history of mental illness. And he says his next victim won't be an inmate. "I murdered that man cold-bloodedly. I planned it, and I'm gonna do it again," the 40-year-old Gleason told the Associated Press. "Someone needs to stop it. The only way to stop me is put me on death row." Gleason already is serving a life sentence for killing another man. He fired his lawyers last month. They were trying to work out a deal to keep him from getting the death penalty so he could plead guilty to capital murder. He's vowed not to appeal his sentence if the judge sentences him to death. 31. "I did this. I deserve it," he said. That man, he didn't deserve to die. Watson was serving a 100-year sentence for killing a man and wounding 2 others in 1983 when he shot into his neighbor's house in Lynchburg with a 10-gauge shotgun. According to prison records, Watson suffered from mild mental impairment and was frequently cited for his disruptive and combative behavior. Watson was sent to Wallen's Ridge on April 23, 2009, a day after he set fire to his cell at Sussex II State Prison. Gleason and Watson became cellmates on May 1. In the days the two spent locked in an 8 by 10-foot cell, Watson would talk about how he had drowned 2 television sets because they had voodoo in them, Gleason said. He would also belt out, I wish I was in the land of cotton, from the song Dixie, and other songs at all hours, scream profanities and masturbate. In the chow hall and in the recreation yard, Watson would get inmates to give him cigarettes for drinking his urine and clabbered milk. You can't be upset with someone like that, Gleason said. He needed help. Gleason said his requests to separate the two were met with mockery and indifference by correctional officers and prison counselors. He said he knew what he'd do once officials refused to put Watson in protective custody. That day I knew I was going to kill him, he said. Wallen's Ridge forced my hand. It was after midnight when Gleason used slivers of bed sheets to tie Watson's hands and arms to his body and fashioned a gag out of 2 socks. He later removed the gag and gave Watson a cigarette, telling him it would be his last. Gleason said Watson spit in his face when he went to take the cigarette out of Watson's mouth, so he jumped on his cellmate's back and beat and strangled the man. He then covered Watson's body with a bedsheet to make it look like he was sleeping. Gleason kept Watson's death a secret through 2 mandatory standing counts, when guards are supposed to make rounds of the cells and have inmates actually stand up to be counted, and 2 meals. Officers didn't find the body until Watson's psychiatrist went to see him at 4:40 p.m. and found him dead, according to court documents. Officers falsely indicated on reports that they had done the counts properly. Prison employees involved in the case denied repeated requests for comment from the AP Department of Corrections spokesman Larry Traylor, also declined to discuss the situation, but said that 2 officers were disciplined and 2 others were fired. One of the fired officers was reinstated upon appeal. Gleason has since been transferred to the Supermax Red Onion State Prison. Watson's sister Barbara McLeod of Longmont Colo said Gleason should be forced to spend the rest of his life in prison with no privileges. He doesn't deserve to be able to control his own destiny at this point. He doesn't deserve to have his death on the conscience of the state of Virginia, she said. McLeod said her brother had a history of mental problems that grew worse during his last decade of incarceration. McLeod said she's upset that her brother was housed with such a violent prisoner and angry that it took so long for guards to realize he was dead. Supposedly they are monitoring these prisoners, she said. I guess not. During a hearing a week before his June 1st trial was to start, Gleason warned Wise County Commonwealth's attorney Ron Elkins that he would kill again if Elkins didn't seek the death penalty. Elkins had offered to let Gleason plead to second-degree murder. He also offered to drop the capital murder charges and come back with a charge that didn't carry a death sentence. Elkins wouldn't say why he made those offers. However, capital murder cases are typically lengthy and expensive, especially as appeals wind through the courts. Even though Gleason confessed, Elkins said he proceeded cautiously to ensure the case couldn't be overturned on appeal. Court records show that Gleason told Elkins he had no remorse for killing Watson. He said he learned from his father to own up to his mistakes and that he needed to prove to his loved ones that actions have consequences. There's nothing you guys can do to me to hurt me. Nothing, he told the prosecutor. But there's something you guys can do to prevent someone else from getting hurt. On May 8, 2007, Robert Charles Gleason Jr. fatally shot Michael Kent Jamerson to death off of Virginia 130 in western Amherst County, Virginia. A turkey hunter found his body in a wooded area. He was shot 4 times, twice to the head and twice to the body. The murder weapon was found on the banks of the James River by a college student who was fishing there. Gleason was part of a methamphetamine drug ring and believed that Jamerson was going to cooperate with the government against the ring. At trial, Gleason burst out with a string of profanities denouncing the court and was removed. Shortly thereafter, he told the judge he wanted to just get this over with today and pled guilty to the murder. 2 years to the day after the Jamerson murder, Harvey Watson was murdered at Wallen's Ridge State Prison. His cellmate Gleason was serving a life plus 3 years sentence for the Jamerson murder and was charged with the willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing of any person by a prisoner confined in a state or local correctional facility, a capital offense. On December 21, 2010, following an evaluation to confirm his competency, Gleason pled guilty to the murder of Watson in the Circuit Court of Wise County. Gleason confessed under oath, stating that he planned the murder to occur on the 2-year anniversary of a previous homicide that he had committed. In 1983, Gleason admitted to binding Watson with torn bedsheets, beating him, taunting him about his impending death, shoving a urine sponge in his face and a sock in his mouth, and finally strangling him with fabric from the sheet. According to Gleason, he concealed the body in his cell for 15 hours, making excuses for Watson's failure to emerge. Gleason further stated that he planned, once rigor mortis had passed, to dispose of the body in the garbage that was circulated to pick up food trays. Gleason was unsuccessful in disposing of the body before Watson was discovered by prison personnel. Throughout the circuit court proceedings, Gleason consistently repeated that he had no remorse. Rather, knowing that the premeditated murder of an inmate, and more than one murder within a 3-year period, was punishable by the death penalty in Virginia, he commented to the court that he already had a few other inmates lined up just in case I didn't get the death penalty that I was going to take out. Following Watson's death, Gleason had been moved to solitary confinement in Virginia's Supermax Red Onion Prison. On July 28, 2010, Gleason was in a solitary recreation pen that shared a common wire fence with that of Aaron Cooper. Gleason asked Cooper to try on a religious necklace that Gleason was making. Gleason proceeded to strangle Cooper through the wire fence, repeatedly choking Cooper till he turned purple, waiting until his color came back, then going back again, until Cooper finally expired. Gleason described himself laughing at the reaction of the other inmates. He then watched and mocked the prison staff, attempting to revive Cooper. Cooper was serving a 34-year sentence for carjacking and robbery. Gleason was charged in the capital murder of Cooper for the willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing of more than one person within a 3-year period. On April 22, 2011, Gleason pled guilty to the murder of Cooper. He informed the court that he had deliberately targeted Cooper so as to make a point to the prosecutor and as a favor to another inmate who was to be released soon, so that the inmate would owe Gleason, and Gleason would then have someone outside the prison to do his bidding. After accepting both guilty pleas, the court conducted a multi-day joint sentencing proceeding, considering evidence and argument by counsel and Gleason. The court also reviewed a pre-sentence report, Gleason having waived a post-sentence report. The court fixed Gleason's sentences at death, finding the aggravating factors of both vileness and future dangerousness in both cases beyond a reasonable doubt, and concluding that these factors were not outweighed by mitigating facts. Robert Gleason's death in Virginia's electric chair ended his reign of violence, but it left behind a chilling legacy. Unlike most killers, he did not fight against the state, he forced its hand. He turned the justice system into a weapon of his own choosing, daring it to carry out the punishment he demanded. To some, his execution was justice, a dangerous man aliened forever. To others, it raised disturbing questions. Did the system truly punish Gleason? Or did it give him exactly what he wanted? Was this justice or surrender? His story remains one of the rare cases where the state executed a man not because he feared death, but because he embraced it. In his final moments, Robert Gleason smirked, mocked the ritual of his own electrocution, and left the world with defiance instead of remorse. The prison walls that should have contained him couldn't. The courts that should have controlled him bowed to his will. and the victims whose lives he stole inside and outside prison are now remembered only as part of his bloody ultimatum. Robert Gleason Jr. proved something terrifying. Sometimes the deadliest threat is not the man who fears death, but the one who welcomes it.